Good morning, everybody, and happy Sunday. I am Caron Tabb, and this is Humanity is Not a Spectator Sport, which I wish I could go up on Mount Everest and yell pretty much every morning. The work in the show is a response to my very personal response to what I feel has needed of me at this point in time as a white female Jewish artist, and each one of those pieces is significant in the creation of the work in this show. I draw very heavily from my Jewish roots, and having grown up in Israel, have a very deep connection to my Judaism, not in a deep religious sense, but in a moral, social action sense, and it infuses pretty much my daily life, but definitely my artwork. So the long story short is that I was born in South Africa, apartheid South Africa in 1965. I'm growing old. And at the age of 8, my parents, who were both Zionists and my father, having suffered from anti-Semitism in rural South Africa, decided to leave and go to Israel. Israel was in its infancy at the time. We moved in 1974, right at the end of the Yom Kippur War, during which Israel was attacked by its 4 neighbors from all sides on one day, the holiest day for the Jewish community. And it was a horrific war, which is, by all means, war is horrific, period, end of statement. So I grew up in Israel, and at the age of 20-something, I met Kevin, and we got married, had our kids there, and moved to the US 20 years ago, lived in Berkeley, and now in the Boston area. And the reason I share this little biographical piece is because each one of those journey parts has become significant in me being here today. I grew up, I was born in a whites-only hospital, and that looms large over the relationship that I have with issues of racial identity, both my relationship to what Blacks might be feeling today, and I can only imagine what, or in general, and also as having my family be part of that system in South Africa. And you can read about this in the catalog, my very close nanny, Christina, was an admired human in my life. And for me, and I was young, so I never understood why she lived in her little room in the back of our house, or in the backyard actually. And Moses was our gardener, same thing. They went home maybe once a year. When we would walk down the street, she always had to carry her little ID card. None of this did I ever understand until I was much older. I remember when my parents made Aliyah, which is the term for going to Israel. When you move, you make Aliyah, which comes from the word to go up. We moved to Israel. I remember she escorted us to the airport, and that was the last time I ever saw her. I have no idea where she is, if she's still alive or what she is doing. And there's a picture of her in this quilt, which I'll talk about in a minute, on her wedding day, which took place in our backyard. And it was only many years later when I went back at the age of 17 to South Africa, which was the first time I'd gone back since the time I was 8, that for some odd reason, still unbeknown to my sister and I, took a bus tour of Soweto. And if you have been to Johannesburg, you know that Soweto is one of the townships where Blacks would live, still do. It is where Nelson Mandela lived. It's where Trevor Noah's grandmother lives. And I vividly recall it actually sends shivers down my spine being on that bus and understanding for the very first time what apartheid meant and means. And I had a fabulous childhood. I pretty much grew up barefoot on a bicycle. And I worked alongside people who were bussed in. Fields were around behind our house, and the people who were bussed in were Yemenite Jews. Many of them came on Operation Magic Carpets, which is how the Jews of Yemen were exited from Yemen years before. There were also Arabs who came from the Gaza Strip every single day to work in the fields. And I also remember on weekends, we would go to Gaza. So we're talking about a 30-minute ride. We would go to Gaza every weekend to the market, to buy cane sugar juice. And thinking about that now, it is kind of mind-boggling to think how far we've gone from that to this. And then people who lived in the little towns around us. So I grew up meeting people who, for the most part, I would not be able to engage with nowadays. But it created this sense of humanity and collective humanity, I would say. I shared food with them. They shared stories with me, and I was young. I wasn't. So I grew up with knowing people from different swaths of life and different sensibilities. A youth worker. So I used to mentor younger students who came from less fortunate homes than I did. And so that's how kind of my nonprofit work began. I became a nonprofit professional, and after Kevin and I got married and moved back to the US, worked continuously in the nonprofit world until we moved to Boston 10 years ago, and I pretty much picked up a paintbrush and haven't looked back. So that's kind of how I became an artist. However, the seeds of the work in the show were planted throughout those different periods of my life. One of the pieces in this book, which I will talk about in a little bit, is this piece right here at the bottom, which says Shalom עכשיו, peace now. And it's a piece, sorry, I'm going to do what nobody else is allowed to do, which is, I'll show you, it's this piece right here. And I cut that out of my t-shirt that I was wearing at the demonstration where the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated in Tel Aviv at the square. And we had our baby, then 6 months old, was sitting on Kevin's shoulders. So those are the seeds of the work that is here before you. So about 2-3 years ago, I had a show here called Off to Places, which spoke about my immigration story. But what I really find important is to take my own story and then shed light on much bigger human issues through the work. And so as I was talking about my immigration story, there were children who were being caged on the border with Texas. So it was an opportunity to talk about immigration, but rather about their story. And so that's how I approach my work. It's really about me, but it's really not about me. So the body of work before you, Humanity is Not a Spectator Sport. The name of the show is a riff on Democracy is Not a Spectator Sport, which was coined by a woman by the name of Lois Sharf, I believe her name is. She was a Holocaust survivor. She lived in Boston. She was one of the founders of the American League of Democratic Women Voters in Boston, and she coined democracy is not a spectator sport. And I feel that as like in democracy, which needs to be tended to every single day, so does humanity. And that if we don't do the work, if I don't do my work, then I'm failing myself. I'm failing my calling, and therefore I have to use what I have to give and elevate that to the level of discourse around that. So this is my response. The first piece in the show is my birth certificate, which you'll be able to, it's this piece right here, right at the entrance of the gallery. So I took, for a very long time, I've been looking at my birth certificate, and if you'll see, I redacted everything except for my race, which is white. And I feel that one of the things that we've been doing to each other so very well is labeling, boxing, and dehumanizing each other. And the starting point for me was to really evaluate for myself what it means to be white today, and understand the role that I play, the role my family plays, the role that all of us play in reinforcing systems of systemic racism that exist all the time, every day, everywhere around us. I felt strongly that that needed to be my starting point. And so for a very long time, that birth certificate, which is a copy of the original and is on metal, sat on our counter table at home. And I would look at it every single day, and I would draw on its copies, and I would think about what it means for me, what is entailed, what does it include? And so that was my starting point. And the reason I broke the glass, I took an empty frame, I went and broke other glass, and reframed it as shattered glasses, because I want to attempt to shatter that notion that we need to look at each other through labels rather than through human eyes, and trying to understand what someone else's story tells versus what we think they are. And I admit that I'm so far from understanding any of it, and it's really at the beginning of my journey. So I've spent the last couple of years reading and listening and talking to, I've listened to many, many podcasts. All of them are listed in this catalog, and read lots of books, and they're all listed in this catalog, trying to self-educate. I've had lots of really, really hard conversations with people who I didn't know before, who are Black, who basically pointed fingers at me and told me how bad I am, and how I am a racist, and how I am reinforcing racial structures. And of course, at the beginning, the first book on my own saliva, because how can it be that here I am, this liberal, well-intentioned woman, how could I be even considered a racist? So I had to sit with that, and I had to sit with that for a very long time and look for the answers in some of the books that I was reading. And one of the conclusions that appears in one of the books, and I don't remember where it is that the people who voted for President Obama, with all good intentions, many feel that that is good enough. And the end of it's enough of a declaration to say, well, I'm not a racist, therefore I'm not part of the system, therefore I do not have to do work. And I grappled with that for quite a long time and came to the conclusion that for me, and again, this is all about me. This is me speaking about me and pointing no fingers at anybody else, just so that we're or clear. I'm inviting you on my journey. I'm not telling you you have to be on it. So I want to make sure that that's understood. For me, that wasn't good enough because I felt like just as pain was caused to Jews in the Holocaust because of how others failed to show up, then I, as a white Jewish woman, am causing pain by failing to show up. And so what does showing up mean for me was the question I posed to myself. The second piece that I want to call your attention to is the one on the back wall over there, which is titled My Invisible Backpack. And the invisible backpack, and when you get up and walk around, you'll be able to see that there's actually an invisible text on the wall above the piece, which is meant to be invisible. Because what happened for me is that I looked at this article written by a feminist scholar by the name of Peggy McIntosh, who teaches at Wellesley College. And she talks, and the article, by the way, is at the entrance of the gallery, and feel free to take a copy with you. She talks about the provisions that white people carry in an invisible backpack that we carry every day, and we're meant not to be aware of. We're meant not to be aware of passports, visas, blank checks, credit cards, legal status, the ability to get a mortgage with no fear or worry, etc., etc., etc. All these things that we're meant not to be aware of. And so I want to become aware of those provisions in my invisible backpack. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about what they are. And one of them is becoming aware of what's in it. So I'll give you a few examples where I know that I absolutely have failed and need to do better. So a couple of months ago, we live in Newton, a nice white affluent neighborhood in Boston. And a couple of months ago, I saw a young Black man pushing his biracial baby in a stroller up our street. And I thought to myself, that's interesting. I don't see many Black people in my neighborhood. And that made me take a double take at myself. Why was I thinking that? And why is it that there are not many Black people living in my neighborhood? So what's wrong with the picture? The confusion of not being able to see facial features of people who are not white in the same way that I can for people whose facial features are much more familiar to me is an example. The notion that I will walk into a grocery store and nobody will follow me around because I'm white versus a very good friend who might be followed around for fear of being a thief. So these are the kind of things that I've started to become aware of and want to become more sensitive to. So that's my personal journey. So that piece includes my own skin tone paint. It was me at the paint store. And in fact, the guy who was helping me told me that was the most exciting day he's had on the job, trying to match my skin tone under the computer camera that they have. And it's cutouts of my own body. And it includes hair, my own hair that I picked up off the salon floor after I got a haircut, because I wanted to make it a very personal thing. It's my very personal journey, which I need to be on. The next piece that I want to point out is this piece, and this is the namesake of the show. Humanity is not a spectator sport, and in this piece, the evolution of this piece is that I walk my dogs every day on a loop around a place called Cold Spring Park. And if you're local, you know where it is. It's this beautiful trail. In the middle of it is a dog park. And But on the sides of it are a basketball court, a baseball court, and tennis courts. And there's also a school. And every day you see these balls that are thrown over the school fence, and they're lying there in the mud. Nobody comes to rescue them, and they just. So I started collecting them, of course, because that's what I do. I collect junk. And I'm thinking to myself, this is really interesting. A kid threw a ball over the fence, never went to pick it up, and now it's lost forever. And it's an interesting idea. It's kind of like human relations. We'll make a move, we'll enact a policy, we'll vote for some form of legislation, and very often not really understand the full impact of what that means and how it relates to other human lives. And it occurred to me really that these sports games are really a form of human relations. You know, you throw a ball, often there's somebody who might catch it, but if you miss, they have to run. So your actions have deep impact on how others react, and at times have consequential, detrimental impacts. So I started collecting all the stuff off the floor of the, around me and everywhere else. And for me, this notion really came into focus not too long ago as the debate around booster shots was happening, whether or not to give people a third booster, or send the shots, Pfizer, Moderna, whatever it is, to poor countries. And it came into full focus for me that rich countries have this huge impact over poor countries, that really by enacting a policy of caring for ourselves, we're impacting other people's lives in the most direct way. So this idea that this marionette-like baseball bat is a metaphor for how we behave towards each other is really critical for me, and includes, there's a Barbie doll leg here, which, could talk about how women are treated. There's a toy rifle in here, which, and the metaphor goes on and on and on. So in general, it's, I think, important to look at abstract art, but particularly conceptual abstract art, as symbolic, as metaphoric, as alluding to an idea that if you dig deeper in, you will understand where the artist is coming from. So that's to somebody who said to me earlier on, I don't understand art at all. Look for the story that the artist is trying to tell you. So the third piece that I want to point out is the piece that's on the floor behind you, and is called Dismantling My Own Monuments. And we've all been privy to the conversation about what to do with the monuments, the Confederate monuments and the celebration of slave owners, and it's this piece that's on the floor right here. And it goes even to the debate around the sculpture that's in front of the Museum of Fine Arts these days, not these days, but it's in front of the Museum of Fine Arts for many, many years, but the Spirit, do you remember the name of it? Appeal to the Spirit, right, which is this beautiful sculpture of a Native American man on a horse ascending to the sky. And there's a big debate about whether or not sculptures like that can be shown, who should be showing them, do they need to be put in context, if so, what context, should they be taken down, who gets to tell that story, etc., etc., etc. And going back to the invisible backpack, I felt like I need to really, in order to understand the issue, need to take myself off a pedestal. I need to take whiteness, my whiteness, fanatic religion, holding to any fanatic relations to other humans off a pedestal, and dismantle it. And so I did. So I built my own bust. It's a copy of my own body. And if you take a look at it closely, you'll see it's covered in white Band-Aids. And for the past year, I've been doing spot checks in different CVSs around the country to see whether or not I could find Band-Aids that are not my skin tone. And the answer is they're very rare. You can buy dark skin Band-Aids in certain pharmacies, in certain areas, and online. But think about that for a moment, right? If you're a Black kid who gets injured and wants a Band-Aid, you could either go with a Paw Patrol or a Disney something, or you have to have a Band-Aid that is my colored skin. And right? It makes you wonder, like, and also, it's only recently that Crayola took out Flesh out of their box. And the color of Flesh in Crayola was this color. The global majority of Black people, I mean, it's a really interesting concept. There's an artist by the name of Senda Ningudi. She's an American artist. She lives in LA. And she talks about in the 70s going to a job interview, and she was looking for women's nylons, and she couldn't find them in her skin tone. So this idea of representation, of where do I see myself, do I fit in, is a question I think we all ask ourselves. But imagine if you're a Black kid, do you fit in? And who do I fit in with? So I took myself off a pedestal as part of this evaluation process. There are a couple of other pieces that I wanted to point out, because they talk about hope, because I feel sometimes I need a vacation out of my own head, because it feels hopeless so often. So I decided that I was going to honor people who are actually doing the work all the time and every day. And one of the women is Ruth Messenger, who is was the CEO of the American Jewish World Service. I told you about is a humanitarian aid agency. Thinking about the concept of tzedakah, which is in Judaism means charity or justice or righteousness. On Friday nights, it's a tradition to collect coins in the tzedakah box and give it away as charity to other organizations, to nonprofits or people who are needy. And so I took the concept and honored Ruth by making a tzedakah box for her. And it includes the inscription, "Justice, justice, I shall pursue," although the biblical term is "you shall pursue." But once again, I'm not telling people what to do. I'm claiming it as my own work. Ruth told me in meetings that I had with her, because I told her I was going to make a tzedakah box for her, and she said she has this dream of having a tzedakah box in front of the MoMA, New York, and it was going to be this see-through box, and she was going to write on it, "Be the change." So kind of this play on both money and activism. And I said to her, "Well, that's what I'm going to do for you. So when you look at the box afterwards, you'll see that the inscription says, 'Be the change.'" And the word here is tzedek, which comes from the word tzedakah, or tzedakah comes from the word tzedek, which means justice. So that's the piece I made for Ruth, and therefore some of the profits are going to the American Jewish World Service through this. And the other piece is this other tzedakah box, which privileges only the artist has. So this is the other tzedakah box, which I made for Tina Cherry. And as I mentioned, she lost her son to accidental gun violence, and I started the Peace Institute. And I often burn things, and Kevin hopes every day that he'll come home and his house will still be standing. And I wouldn't have burnt it down. But so I burnt her nest. And in a homage to Tina and her incredible strength, she rises as a phoenix in my mind. And the box itself is hand felted and is embroidered with the words, again, Tzedek, justice. And this is my homage to Tina. The other piece of incredible hope that I found extremely powerful during the last couple of years is this quote. And it's called Fabric of Humanity, Repairing My World. And in the Jewish tradition, repairing the world is a critical Jewish tenet. Tikkun olam, right? We seek justice, we work for justice, we engage with the community we live in. And so I started my own humanity, Fabric of Humanity during COVID. So many of you know that I had a front row seat to pandemic management during COVID. So my husband runs a hospital system, the best in town. And that would be PILH, just shameless plug. And in the very few days when he was not sleeping and not eating much and counting ventilators in his head as he went to bed and thinking about how to move patients so there would be enough ICU beds and while securing PPE and supporting the incredible staff that works for the hospitals, I was thinking about what it meant for me. What does it mean to that this entire world, this universe is connected by an invisible enemy? For the first time, maybe, I don't know, since the Spanish flu, the entire world was connected by something that was, in a sense, an equalizer, but we know it wasn't. So I started stitching together tiny little pieces of fabric, both because if you're a knitter or a sewer, you know that the rhythmic movement has a calming element. And if you're a beader or anybody who draws, there's something very cathartic and very comforting about that repetition and small movement. So I started stitching little pieces together and then thought to myself, wow, we're all suffering from the same thing right now. It wouldn't be incredible if I collected my humanity together and put everybody together. So I sent out a letter to my friends and family and asked if they would go through their fabrics at home and send me a piece of fabric that they found to be meaningful. And I had no idea what I was going to get in return, but I got the most unbelievable and significant pieces from people all over the world. And so I'll point out a few of them which are really, really significant. One of them is this piece. I don't know if you can see over there, but it's this beautiful round piece of old silk, which was in fact and still is falling apart. It is probably 150 years old, and it's a nightcap that, if any of you know Carol Anderson, it's her great aunt's nightcap that she brought over through Ellis Island from the old country. And she said to me, it's sitting in my drawer, I have nothing to do with, don't know what to do with it, have it in perpetuity and have it be a piece of art. And so that was the first piece that arrived, and that made me think to myself, wow, actually people are A, giving it much thought, and B, it's become significant. A friend who lost a child to a car accident sent me the sock that says the universe is kind of a dick. And with a note that said, this is what helped me get through hard times and dark nights. There's a piece here from a surgeon at the BI. Many of you might know him. His name is Caron Tabb. He is a Lebanese surgeon. And this is the most incredible story. So we become friends with him and his wife. And he couldn't attend his father's funeral about 20 years ago or so, because at the time his father was living in Beirut and he was already here. He couldn't go because Israel was bombing Lebanon and the airport was closed and the Israeli military was bombing southern Lebanon. And at the time, Kevin was in the military. And so here we are sitting at dinner in Newton, on two sides of the border, having an incredible meal and creating incredible relationships after this kind of dichotomy of a historical moment that impacted both sides of the border. So they gave me this beautiful white, see it right here, it's, you see the top right piece where the red, yellow, and blue flowers are. They gave me a napkin that they used growing up in Lebanon on special occasions. And a couple of weeks ago, he lost his mother, and he couldn't go to be with her on her deathbed because of what was going on internally within Lebanon. So she died, and he wasn't by her side. And so I took another piece from what was left over from that napkin, and I made homage to his mother. And so these kind of incredible things started coming out through this quilt, which if we looked at humanity through the eyes of humanity and humankind, I feel like we could do so much better. There's some other really amazing moments in this quilt. One of them is our daughter's very best friend lost her father. But when I asked them to send me a piece, they sent me the mother, the daughter, the father, and Shai, our daughter's best friend. And so I put the family back together. And suddenly I realized that in my studio, in my tiny little studio, I could totally repair the world, right? I could make magic happen. And so I started making magic happen. And it became this really incredible piece that provided me hope and solace and comfort. On the back side are the backstories. Hand-stitched are the notes that came with the pieces. And I decided I wanted to include them in the show also because they really talk about what's in the front of the piece. And the last piece that I think really gives me hope is this piece that's on the wall right here. It is my version of a mezuzah. So the mezuzah piece is a box that Jewish people often put on the right-hand side of the doorpost of their house. This is, let's see, I'll pick it up. And a mezuzah, the tradition is, it includes some pieces from Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy inside. And it's written on parchment. The biblical story of how a mezuzah came to be is around the holiday of Passover. And the plagues that were inflicted on the Egyptians during the time of Jewish slavery when the Jews built the pyramids in Egypt. As Moses is trying to get the Jewish people out of Egypt and it's not working and he's saying, let my people go. And God is inflicting these biblical plagues on the Egyptians and the last one to happen is the death of the firstborn of the Egyptians. And the way God knew not to inflict a specific home was the inscription of a blood of a sheep on the right-hand side of a doorpost with the three marks. And that is the origin of the mezuzah, and that is how God knew to pass over the Jewish home and not kill the firstborn. So that's the story of the mezuzah. But it talks about the faith between humans and God. And for me, it's about the relationship between human and human. And you can see the results of fanatic religion every single day in countries all over the world. And so I decided to replace the content of the original mezuzah with my own, which is a piece from Psalms. And the literal translation of it is, I'll read it to you. It is, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from telling lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. And so that is my mezuzah. That is my response to that. Once again, a burnt piece of wood with 24-karat covered barbed wire, a nod to a different time in Jewish history. But I feel that if we kept that in mind every single day when we exited our home or entered someone else's, we would be far better. So with that, I can keep going on and on and on about the different pieces in the show, but I want to ask if you have any questions or if I could elaborate on anything more. So please, yes.
I love your interpretations of some of the art, and congratulations.
Thank you.
For the show. I wondered if you could give us some deeper understanding of
the piece behind you. Yeah, so let me just show what that is. So that is, the piece is called, Let Us Never Forget How We Got Here, and today is anchored to our past. So that's the piece in the back right here. Yes, so as I'm working on this show and thinking about the impact that slavery has had on the country, and of course on the Black population, you realize that in essence, our prison system is in many ways a modern day form of slavery. And if we think about the origins of the prison system and how it came to be and who's in it and why, I think that we can go directly back to slavery. And so that is a nod to that. And the idea that we should actually never forget, and that prison reform is deeply tied to racial reform, and that until we don't do that, then and of course many other things such as elevate, the level of public education and housing and all the many other things that are connected to that, we're just going to keep reinforcing these systemic inequalities and systemic racial oppressive systems. And so actually these two pieces dialogue with each other in a way that I find interesting. Of course I do them. And so that is kind of about that piece. Yeah. So, sure, yes.
I went to the Trinidad Tobago. I was just wondering where that
came from. So yes, if you know the Bowdoin Street Healthcare Center, it's the largest healthcare center, community healthcare center in the Israel legal system, and serves the entire Bowdoin Geneva population in Dorchester. does the most unbelievable work. In fact, the doctors and nurses and people who work there do, in my mind, God's work every single day. And the woman who was until recently running that the place was named Felila Peast, and she is from Trinidad. Her family is from Trinidad and Tobago, and that is what she gave me. And I was thrilled to get it because, and then you'll see that there are a lot of nods to different countries in the world. There's a Brazilian piece right here from the Brazilian flag, and others. So that was a great thrill for me. She said it belonged to her parents, and that she wanted me to have them put it in the quilt. There's a question. Can't see the end of it. So the chronology of the work. The chronology of the work is, I would say the first piece was the invisible backpack and my birth certificate, even though the chronology is the quilt. Like I started working on this a very long time ago, and it's taken almost 2 years. And it's still not complete because if you bring me pieces, I'll include them. And it'll keep growing for sure. I think some of it was as history unfolded in front of us. There's a piece in the back there that is a for sale sign. And it's part of a yard sign series, which it's interesting when you drive around, particularly apparently in New England. I didn't know that this was not a West Coast thing, but the yard signs speak volumes. They're silent giants, but they're actually very, very loud, right? You know so much about the person living in the house by the yard sign that's on the outside. And so it became very apparent to me, particularly during these last elections, and even as late as last week's elections, what's up for grabs every time we go to the polls? Voting rights, voting suppression, human rights, women's rights, etc., etc. There's so much up for grabs. So as part of the chronology of the show, that happened around the time of the elections. So, and then I rework pieces. I go back and I rework them. This, for instance, is a piece full of COVID headlines, which really allude to the injustice around access to healthcare and how low-income families, minority families, were disproportionately affected by COVID. And so that was also something that happened during and over the time of the last year. And it's called the sacrifice of our Isaac. So God says to Isaac, God says to Abraham, bring me your son to the altar. And so what happens when we sacrifice others in the name of a blind faith or a blind conviction of capitalism or racism, white supremacy, whatever you want to call it. So I'm asking us to consider what it means to sacrifice and who we're sacrificing in this piece. Yeah.
What's your hope for this event?
So my hope is, it's a really good question, and I put it back to you. I ask you in return, what is your hope and what you think you might be able to do to bend the arc of justice? I know for me, this is my hope, that we can talk about it, that we can face the reality of who we are and what we do every single day, what the outcome of our actions is, and that we not be afraid of reevaluating what we hold near and dear, but rather take it to the next level. So there's a woman whose name is eluding me right now. She's in this, the notion of being an upstander. So she talks about taking a clipboard, organizing your neighbors, finding out what's on the ballot, registering people to vote, becoming active in your local community, in your larger community, calling the JALSA office, and Cindy's right here, she'll tell you what you need to do. Okay, free lunches for all kids in the Boston Public School is going through the legislature now. You think about that for a moment. There are kids who need free lunch every single day, and it's not obvious to us that we need to make that measure happen. How is that not obvious to us? So there are extremely tangible outcomes that every single one of us can be engaged in. And for me, if we don't do that, then for me, it's lip service. And this piece is called Empty Vessels Carry No Promises. If all I do is talk about it, if all I do is, blah, blah, then there will be no desired outcome. There will be no real change. And so this for me is a charge. The edges are really sharp and the water will go right through. So this for me, the charge, the shofar, this piece right over here, which are two shofars. So the Jewish high holy days, this ram's horn is blown during and at the conclusion of Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. As Jews, we fast, we ask for forgiveness, we think about our actions for the past year and our deeds for the coming year. And at the conclusion of that day, the shofar sounded, this wailing sound of for a community that is so embedded in words and language. We have no words. We have no language for what it means to beg for forgiveness and ask to do better. And so the wailing sound of the shofar, if it is broken, if it is pierced, if it is cut up, it's all but lip service.